I'm happy to introduce Sarah Gross, the Engagement Specialist for the Michigan History Center. She is going to do a presentation on good sources and how to cite them, and she has graciously been helping me all day long, monitoring the chat and videotaping. So thank you, Sarah, and take it away whenever you're ready.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I am very bad at multitasking, so I'm just going to be quiet for a second while I share my screen. And I apologize for my dog. She will be going out on a walk soon, I promise. All right, can everybody see that?
Looks good.
Thank you. All right, so today during this session, we are going to be talking about good sources and how to cite them. I've been judging History Day for many years, and today you'll get to hear about a few of my pet peeves that often pop up in the annotated bibliography section. We are going to talk about where should you start? Where should you start looking for good sources? How do you follow all the rules? I do have some handouts that I'll reference throughout the PowerPoint, and those will be in the Google Drive folder that Amy is going to make sure everyone has access to after this. So without further ado, let's get started. So if you're about to start working on your History Day project, you might be wondering what is expected of you in terms of research and things like that. Whether it's your first ever History Day or if you've done it before, this question can definitely still be confusing. And so today we're going to talk about what's expected of you in terms of research and citations. What are the judges looking for? So luckily, History Day makes it really easy to know what's expected of you. They provide a really helpful rubric that shows exactly how the judges evaluate your project. It shows which parts are most important. And as you can see here on this slide, as of this year, I think we have new rubrics that the judges will be using. So as of this year, the judges are looking for clarity of presentation and historical quality. Clarity of presentation is worth 20% of how they're evaluating you. And the other 80%, that's a lot, is historical quality. So this is definitely the most important category when the judges are making their final decisions about how to rank your project. As you can see on this sample judging sheet, the judges are paying close attention to your sources and your research. They want to see if your project shows wide research. Did you consult a lot of different sources, spend time visiting libraries and archives, or maybe this year because of COVID, library and archives websites, that kind of thing. They want to see that you are making use of available primary sources. Is there a famous speech or photograph or document that directly relates to your topic? If so, did you take the time to find it, and did you include it in your research? They're also looking for historical accuracy, which you can see is the third one down that's circled. Did you use quality sources that contain factual information? So there are obviously a lot of other categories under historical quality that the judges are also going to be looking at, but today I'm going to focus on the three that I just mentioned and that are circled here in red, because that's related to good sources and how to cite them. All right, so if you're still not quite sure about what's expected of you, here are a few signs to look out for, kind of a checklist, if you will. If you are doing some or all of these things, then you are most likely doing pretty good or excellent research by History Day standards. So first, did you start out by consulting reputable background sources to understand your topic? So Tim Gleisner earlier today spoke a little bit about background sources, and we'll talk about them more today, or more in this session as well. Second, are the sources that you're using from expert authors, reputable authors? Are the online sources that you're using from reputable places, like archives, historical societies, libraries, museums, government agencies, or universities? Next, have you found a live person to interview that either lived through your topic or is an expert about it? You definitely do not have to do this, but if you have done it, that's good research. Did you double check all of your information with another source? That's always good practice. Did you use a wide variety of sources, such as books, letters, oral histories, videos, photographs, memoirs, and diaries? You want to have some variety in the types of sources that you're using. And finally, have you used a good number of primary sources, or at the very least, have you found some of the more widely available primary sources that the judges will probably be expecting to see? So all of these tips and more are included on the research rubric, which is one of those handouts that I mentioned at the beginning, and those can be found in the Google Drive folder that Amy will be sharing later. So now we're going to dive into some of these words that I've been using that might be a little bit unfamiliar depending on like what grade you're in and whether or not you've done History Day before. Some of the most important words that we need to learn about are primary source and secondary source. Have any of you heard either of these terms before or studied them in school, if there are any students in the audience? Amy, I can't see the chat, so if anyone puts anything in, just let me know.
I will. Yep, I'm not. Let me see.
Perfect. So we'll just move right ahead then. A primary source is a source that was created at the time an event occurred or by people who lived through the event. So these might include letters that people wrote, speeches they gave, diary entries, newspaper articles from the time period. I think we've mentioned newspaper articles a couple times during our sessions today because they can be really valuable primary sources. It also includes original documents, photographs, or even objects from the time period. An interview could also be a primary source if it's with someone who lived through your topic. And then we have secondary sources. Secondary sources are ones that were written by someone who has already studied your topic but didn't live through it themselves. So most books that you find, biographies, websites, magazines, textbooks, and documentaries are most likely going to be secondary sources. There could be some exceptions in there, but for the most part, that's usually how it breaks down. All right, let's do a little bit of practice. This is going to be a little more difficult than usual, I think, because we're not all in the same room together, but hopefully we can make it work through the chat. So I'm going to put up a couple of different sources on the screen, and I just want to take some time to try to figure out if they're primary sources or secondary sources. So first up, we have a biography of Theodore Roosevelt. It was written in 1992. And it was written by Nathan Miller. So what do people think? Primary source or secondary source?
You can just put it in the chat if you like, or you can unmute. We're seeing secondary. Secondary.
You're all pros. Excellent. Secondary source. So the author, Nathan Miller, almost certainly consulted a lot of primary sources during his research and then wrote about what he learned from those sources. What about this one? This is a letter written by Abraham Lincoln in 1865. What do you guys think?
Primary is the first person's put it in. Primary.
You're right. Yes, this one is a primary source. It was written, by Abraham Lincoln himself. It was written by someone who lived through the time period that we're talking about. All right, here we have a newspaper article from 1912. So you can see kind of right up here at the top, April 16th, 1912, about the sinking of the Titanic. And the Titanic did sink in 1912.
Primary.
What do you guys think? Man, we have definitely learned about this in school already. You guys are great at this. So there are lots of ways that you could use this newspaper article as a primary source if you wanted to look at, what the media was saying about the sinking of the Titanic at the time that it happened, or maybe there's like a little interview in here with someone who knew someone that was on the Titanic or something like that. So newspapers make excellent primary sources. And then this one, I have all the faith that you will get this one right as well. This is a magazine article that was published in 2012, 100 years after the sinking of the Titanic.
Secondary, that came up real quick. Secondary.
Yeah, because people are really good at this. You like have practiced already, I can tell. Yep, this one is a secondary source because it was written by people who did not live through the event. They just studied the primary sources and other secondary sources about the event in order to write the article. All right, so slightly different format here. This is our last one. This is a photograph of workers at a lumbering camp, and it dates from the late 1800s.
Primary.
Excellent. Yes, this one is also a primary source. It was taken, during the time period that the lumbering camps were in operation. It shows us exactly how things looked and what the work environment was like for these workers. So excellent primary source if you're doing a project on lumbering camps or lumberjacks or something like that. All right, so you might be wondering, how many sources do you need? How many do I have to find? And unfortunately, there's no right answer to this question. History Day does not require that you have any particular amount of sources. However, if you only have 1 or 2 sources in your bibliography, the judges might think that your research was not as wide as it could have been, or that it's not balanced since you're only getting your information from one perspective. So knowing that there is no right answer, I would recommend that you start with the goal of finding 7 to 10 really good sources. Some of these can be images, but some of them should also be primary and secondary sources. Neither type of source is better than the other. You will most likely need to use both to create a well-researched, balanced History Day project. And of course, once you dive in, it's likely that you'll find even more than 10 great sources, and that's okay too. Just remember to only include sources that you actually used in your final bibliography. So my headphones, the battery is dying, so just give me 1 second to switch to a different pair.
While Sarah's doing that, I'll just kind of cut it and say it really depends on your topic as to what you can find with primary or secondary sources. But like she said, it's really the ones that you can find that you can use, and that's really important. Having the most sources doesn't give you an advantage, doesn't make your project any better than the other. It's how you use the sources you have. And one other thing, I don't know if Sarah will talk about this, but one other thing I would mention too is if all of your sources are one type of medium, like all your primary sources are photographs, you may want to do some more work and see what you can find, because that's a great place to start, but there are lots of other types of primary sources that you can probably find on your topic. So be careful with those.
Thanks, Amy. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep, you're fine.
Okay, excellent. Yes, thank you for saying that. I think I breezed through that part a little too fast during my checklist at the beginning, but you do want to make sure that you have a good mix of types of sources. So not just photographs for your primary sources, that kind of thing. So where did I leave off? All right, so where do I start? Where should you start when you're doing your History Day research? Usually the best place to start is with a particular kind of secondary source that we often refer to as a background source. You definitely heard Tim Gleisner talk about this earlier today, but I'll just touch on it briefly as well. When you start background research, you are looking at very sort of broad summaries of your topic with the goal of learning the basics and understanding some of that historical context that goes with it. A background source might be something like an encyclopedia, maybe a textbook, but you're going to want to start by, well, I guess I should say during normal times, not during COVID. During normal times, you would want to start by checking with your school library to see what kinds of encyclopedias you have access to. They might be physical books. It might be a subscription that your school has to an online database like Britannica School that you can access using your student login credentials. Your local library might also offer online subscriptions that you can use by putting in your library card number. And if you want to know more about that, I would definitely go back and rewatch Tim's presentation from earlier this morning, because he goes into quite a bit of detail about how to access these different subscriptions and databases through your library. And then finally, to echo Tim once again, the Michigan e-Library, MELCAT, is a wonderful place to start. If you don't have access to your school library, or you don't have access to your local public library, you can start at MELCAT as long as you have an IP address that traces to Michigan. If you go to their e-resources page, which I have up on the screen right here, you can access all kinds of wonderful subscription sources like Britannica School, Explora, things like that. So this is a great place to start for some of that background research. So there we go. Here's Britannica School, which is really like an encyclopedia. All right, here we have this graphic again that just reminds you to start big, start with your reference and background sources, then narrow it in, get to your secondary sources. These are going to provide the context and the understanding that you need to then move on to primary sources, and that's in the center. All right. So what next? Now that you've gotten started, usually the best place for your next step is going to be continuing to explore other secondary sources beyond textbooks and encyclopedias. Your background your background research might have included citations for books or websites. Definitely check those out. So like scroll to the end of that encyclopedia article at Britannica School, see if they cited any books or websites that might be reputable, and then go find that book and read it. That's a good way to find secondary sources. By reading lots of secondary sources, you'll get an overview of your topic, you'll understand the bigger picture, and these secondary sources themselves often have a bibliography or other citations that will then help you identify primary sources that you can look up. Other important things to keep in mind as you start your research is that you should take good notes as you go. If you don't, and you leave the bibliography until the end, you might have a very hard time retracing your steps and remembering where you found all the different pieces of information. If you'd like, we did include a note-taking sheet in that Google Drive folder that you'll have access to at the end. So that's a helpful tool that you can use. And this last one is a hard one to train yourself to do, but ultimately you're going to want to be selective about the information that you take notes on and that you use in your project. You can't cover every single detail, so you're going to have to make decisions about what information is the most important, what information is directly related to your thesis, to your argument that you're trying to make. You're probably going to find lots of interesting things that are related to your topic, but they're not related to the argument that you're trying to make about it. So you're going to have to make some decisions about what to keep and what not to keep. Does anyone have any questions so far?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but feel free to unmute and ask any questions if you have them now. Thank you so much for the thing about take careful, legible notes as you find sources. That student, I'll admit it, when I was in like middle school and high school, that would get going and wouldn't record where she found her stuff, and then would have to go back and try and find it, and there were lots of tears. So make sure you're recording where you're getting the stuff from so that you can get back to it.
Yeah, I think if you end up doing a History Day project and not taking any notes on any of your sources until the end, it will be a mistake that you only make once, because it will be an unpleasant experience and you will want to avoid it in the future. So, okay, moving on. Where should you look for secondary sources? There are a lot of good places to look for secondary sources. Again, caveat, during normal times, you might want to visit your school's library to see if they have any books about your topic. You might want to visit your local public library. Public libraries often have magazines, books, documentaries, all kinds of different mediums that you can look into. And if they don't have anything about your topic, most libraries do participate in some sort of interlibrary loan program, which Tim talked a little bit about this morning. You can use a database at the library to see if there are any other libraries in the state that have books about your topic, and then request that those books be sent to your library for you to research. Of course, the internet also has a wealth of sources, but not all of them are good sources. And that's really what I'm here to talk about today. It is okay to Google your topic and see what sources pop up, but you really have to be choosy. You can find entire books, newspaper articles, magazine stories on the internet. That is all great. You're going to want to specifically be checking the websites of archives, historical societies, libraries, museums, government agencies, or universities. These are likely to be more trustworthy sources than like some random website that you can't tell who made it or if it's credible or not. You should generally be checking multiple places, not just your school library, not just the internet. It can definitely feel easier to do all of your research just by, searching things on the internet, but it's a lot harder to sort through everything that's available on the internet to find the good stuff. So it's definitely a useful tool, but there are other tools that you could and probably should also be using. And I do realize that is going to be slightly harder this year because of COVID, but Tim provided some great suggestions for how to make that happen. So there we go. How to find good primary sources. So the first thing, again, that I would suggest is just checking the bibliographies of your secondary sources. If you see a primary source listed that looks like it might be useful for your project, try to locate it. For example, if you are reading a biography of Abraham Lincoln as one of your secondary sources, you might look at the bibliography and see that they cite Lincoln's House Divided speech. That's just in their bibliography. This speech by Abraham Lincoln would be a primary source since it was written and delivered by Lincoln himself. To track it down, you might go to the internet, do a quick search to see if the full text of the speech is available, and you would find that the Library of Congress has a book, Abraham Lincoln Speeches Complete, and it's available to read for free online through HathiTrust. So there you go. You have found a primary source just by looking through the bibliography of your secondary sources. Next, I might start visiting archives and libraries or visiting them online, which you can definitely do. If your topic is about Michigan, you could visit a local or state archive in person, or maybe call them and see if they're offering reference services over the phone or over Zoom. But if your topic is about a different part of the country or the world, it might be easier to find those primary sources online. Many archives and libraries, luckily, have digitized their collections or parts of their collections, so you can see these primary sources right on your computer screen. You could go to the website for the Archives of Michigan, which is michiganology.org, and search for your topic within their collections. You could visit the Library of Congress or the Internet Archive website and search for your topic. If you find a great resource through an archives website, but it has not been digitized yet, you can always send them an email or give them a phone call and just ask, just see if it's possible for them to either scan it or just make a copy and send it to you. There might be a small charge for this, but I think like Tim said, most of these places are also very familiar with History Day and they will be happy to help you. We do have as well in that Google Drive folder that I keep mentioning, just kind of a quick roundup of good online sources, good places to do your research. And that document does include all of the websites that Tim talked about in his session, plus a couple of the other ones that I've talked about during my session. All right. Any questions that have come in over the last couple slides?
Nope, no questions.
Sounds good. So the internet, Yes, beware the internet. The internet is a great way to access resources that might be otherwise difficult to find, but it is also full of inaccurate information and sources that really just are not good. Anyone can make a website, and no one is really checking them to make sure if the information on them is true. A good online source would be a website that is clearly associated with a reputable institution. So again, that would be something like a historical society, a government agency, a museum, a university, or archives. You can usually tell these sites from other sites because they will have, instead of a .com at the end, they'll have a .gov or a .mil or .edu or .org. Generally, there are some exceptions to this, but generally a good online source will not have advertisements all over the page. It will cite its sources and it will list a date of creation or a date of last update. So let's look at some examples of that. Our first example here, this is a website that is tied to a government archive. So we've got our .org up here. If you went to the About page, you would see that Seeking Michigan is affiliated with the Archives of Michigan. You can see that right here as well. It has the date of creation listed right here. It's a bit hard to read, but June 22nd, 2018. And it cites its sources. So that's what we've got under this circle here. These are all clues that this information was written by history professionals. It's well researched and it's reliable. So now we're going to look at an example of a source that is less appropriate for History Day. We've got the same information, history of the typewriter, but this website seems to be a store, like a retail store where you can buy typewriters. It has our .com up at the top. It does not list any sort of publication date about when this was written or if it was updated. And it doesn't cite its sources. Whoops. Sorry about that. Going way ahead. It does not cite its sources. So I'm definitely not saying that the information on this site is bad. I'm just saying that we have no reason to believe it's true. It didn't really pass any of our sort of little tests for figuring out if a source might be reliable. All right. And so for this reason, if I were doing a History Day project on the history of the typewriter, I would certainly go with this source from the Archives of Michigan over this source from mytypewriter.com. All right, so this is something that I see quite a bit in History Day projects, so I really want to address it. This is what I was talking about at the beginning. It's one of my pet peeves. There is, to my knowledge, no rule against using or citing Wikipedia in your project, but I would argue that you should not use Wikipedia as a direct source in your annotated bibliography. Wikipedia is an online encyclopedia that is written and edited by the public. That means that biased or false information can sometimes make its way onto Wikipedia, and you wouldn't really know either way because you're using it as a source to learn more. So if what you're reading is biased information, you might just assume it's fact and include it in your project. There is no rule, like I said, against citing it in your bibliography, but judges might ask you why you chose to do so, or they might feel that the historical quality of your project isn't quite what it could be. It is not a reliable source on its own, but Wikipedia can be a really good place to gather leads for good sources. When you find a Wikipedia article that is helpful to your topic, instead of using it as a source on its own, you can scroll to the very bottom where the sources and external links are listed, and you will likely find some really good primary and secondary sources listed there that you can then look up through the archives or library website. The same goes for images that you find on like Google Images or Pinterest. I cannot tell you how many times I've looked at a History Day annotated bibliography and seen all the images were credited to Pinterest.com, which is it's not a source on its own. Pinterest and Google Images are just aggregators. What that means is that they pull images and content from all over the internet, from different websites, and they show it to you all at once, but they didn't post the images and they don't own them. And for that reason, you really shouldn't be citing them on your bibliography. What they're doing is just showing you a little snippet of someone else's website. So if you find a great image on Pinterest or Google Images or whatever, what you can do is click on it and see what website that image actually appears on that they're pulling from. If it looks like a reputable website, you can go to that website, go ahead and use that image. If it doesn't look like a reputable source or something like that, see if you can find the image elsewhere on a more reputable site so that you know it's not fake or altered in any way. So I have a couple of examples to show you. I tried to make them into little videos because I wasn't sure I'd be able to share my screen very well. So hopefully they work. Okay. So this first one is an example of using Google to try to find an image. I've Googled Elijah McCoy. I've gone to the Images tab of Google, and now I'm going to scroll down until I see a URL that looks like it might be reputable. So I found one here for Michigan Radio, which is a public radio station. It's got a .org. It's about Elijah McCoy. And if I scroll down to look at these images some more, I can see that they have credited the image, which is great. So now I know where I can go to find the original image. Rather than citing Google Images or even Michigan Radio, I know that I can go to the Bentley Historical Library to access that image, and I would cite the Bentley Historical Library because that is where that image lives historically. I've also found lots of other great images because I didn't just stay on Google. I came to this great secondary source and I started scrolling through what they had included in their research. So I've also found images from the Detroit Historical Society and the Henry Ford Museum. And our second example is about how to use Wikipedia to find good sources. So here, I'm going to start right at Wikipedia. I'm going to type in Pearl Kendrick. That's the topic of my project. And instead of spending a lot of time up here at the top, I'm going to go right down to the bottom to the Notes and References section. And I'm going to look at all the great sources they have listed here. Michigan Women's Historical Center and Hall of Fame. That's a great one. So I know I could click that and see what they have. We've got University of Michigan Bentley Historical Library. That's a reputable source. We have a medical journal, Emerging Infectious Diseases. That's a great one. We have an article that was actually written by Pearl Kendrick herself. That might be a good primary source. So lots of good options here. And what I usually do is I start by just clicking through, like whatever links they have, I click through to get the good information. So here we've come to the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame website. We're going to see what they have on this topic. And there we go. Just from a quick look at Wikipedia, we've found a good secondary source that we can use that gives us some general background on Pearl Kendrick. If we go back to Wikipedia, we will also find, a finding aid for the Pearl Kendrick papers. This is most likely going to be primary sources. These are papers from the files of the person that we're talking about. And we have all this information about how to access them. We can see that the collection is open for research, that they can convert them to digital formats, all that kind of stuff. So rather than just finding information on Wikipedia and citing it, assuming it's true, we're going to use Wikipedia as a way to find other reputable secondary and primary sources. Does anyone have questions about that? No, I went kind of quick because they were videotaped, so I was trying to keep up.
Those are great. I love them.
Good.
Any questions anyone has? You can unmute or put them in the chat. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but you can always unmute.
All right. Oops. Okay, so this is our last topic for this session. You've heard a lot about citations and your bibliography throughout this presentation, but what are they? A bibliography is a list of all the sources that you used to put together your History Day project. And every single History Day project, regardless of category, does require an annotated bibliography. Each source needs to be listed in a particular way, so be sure to use a style guide. We have some of those style guides linked in one of the documents that is in the Google Drive. There you go. You will also need to separate your sources on your annotated bibliography between primary and secondary. So have a section like we have up here just for the primary sources, and then beneath it you would have another section just for the secondary sources. The most important part of your bibliography, though, is the annotation. Annotation means that you are including a note that explains how you used the source and how it helped you understand your topic. This is really important, and the judges do pay attention to it. One thing that I would say, and this again may just be personal preference on my part as a judge, but you generally are going to want to write more than just, I found pictures on this website. You're going to want to do something like what we have here in the example. So in the example, they've cited American-led Irish rebels. This is an article from the Boston Globe newspaper from 1916. And their annotation explains that this image from a newspaper article is used to emphasize how his excuse from his death sentences was because of his US citizenship. So they're specifically explaining what they learned from this source, not just that they found a picture there. This image also helps show his international impact by including a source from US newspapers. So they're explaining that the fact that this person showed up in a US newspaper at all means that, you know, people from other countries were paying attention to what they were doing. So annotated bibliography, very important. You're going to want to write a little bit more than just a couple of words. Questions about bibliographies? Okay. All right, so where to include citations? In addition to your annotated bibliography, you might also need to include citations within your project. This depends on the type of project that you're doing. And as you can see here on the slide, and I'll go over these in a second, we have different sort of criteria for different categories of projects. But citations are just short notes that tell people which source from your bibliography you got that piece of information or picture from. It's very important to include them when they're required because it shows people that you're not trying to plagiarize any part of your project. You're giving credit to where you got the ideas from. Each category of project, like I said, has different requirements for citations. For papers, you need to include footnotes or in-text citations for any paraphrased ideas or quotes. That's important. For exhibits and websites, you need to include in-text citations for all quotes and images, but not for paraphrased ideas. For a performance, you only need a bibliography. And for a documentary, you need to include credits at the end of your film. So let's look at an example. This is a History Day website project, and you can see here that they have cited all of the quotes that they've used. So this one at the top, they say who it's from. This one down here, they say, you know, what document it was from. This one down here, they say who said it. We've got a credit for the images that they've used. And then down here, we have a credit, well, you can't really see it on my side, but a credit for the audio clip that they've used. It is important that they did this because now the judges know that they're not trying to pass off anything as their own. And additionally, it means that they're complying with the History Day rules for this type of project. All right, so a quick note on plagiarism. This is something that I just mentioned on the last couple of slides. This is another big word that if you don't know it already, you will learn about it when you're working on your History Day project. Plagiarism is when you use someone else's words or ideas in your project without giving them credit. Plagiarism is obviously a big no-no for History Day, And if you do it intentionally, you know that you're doing it, technically it could get your project disqualified. Don't worry though, it is very easy to avoid as long as you follow a few simple rules. So first, you want to make sure that you list all of the sources that you used in your annotated bibliography and that you cite them appropriately within your project. So that was the last slide that we just talked about. Second, anytime you use someone else's exact words, be sure to put them in quotation marks and include a citation that shows where you got that quote from. Generally, you shouldn't use quotes. This is me saying this. Generally, you shouldn't use quotes unless the quote is perfect. In most cases, like almost all cases, you're going to want to put that quote into your own words. That is called paraphrasing. My third rule is to paraphrase wherever possible, but be sure that you are still including whatever citations you need to show which source you're paraphrasing. So let's look at a quick example. Up here, we have a passage from a website about Yamasaki, who is an architect. If, it's just like a basic informational passage from a book or a website. If I want to include information from this passage in my History Day project, I have two options. My first option is to use the author's exact words, but to put it in quotation marks and include a citation. So that's exactly what I have here on the screen. I've just taken the exact quote, put it in quotation marks, and then noted that I got it from Britannica.com. My second option is to paraphrase it. So I could take the information in this passage and put it in my own words. Yamasaki was an American architect who lived during the 20th century. He was known for designing buildings that appealed to the senses. So quotes are really helpful. Like option one, it would be really helpful if I really wanted to convey the exact words that were used, because those exact words are really important. But unless the words are particularly special, you're really better off paraphrasing it. In this example that I have here, I would definitely recommend that you paraphrase the information, not quote it. So generally, like I've said many times, you should be paraphrasing, not quoting. In the example above, it would be much better to paraphrase, but it's also really good to include quotes as long as they're good quotes. So the information that we started with, there was nothing particularly special about the way it was phrased. It was just a passage from an encyclopedia, didn't add anything to the project. However, what you might want to do is to accent your project with a direct quote from Yamasaki himself. This could give the viewer insight into what he was thinking. The exact words that he used are really unique, and they give you some insight into who he is as a person. So that's what I just put up on the screen here, is a direct quote from Yamasaki that I found in an oral history interview that he did within archives. We build buildings which are terribly restless, and the buildings don't go anywhere. They shouldn't be restless. So this quote, it gives you some insight into his design philosophy and why he's designing these buildings that, as the encyclopedia says, appeal to the senses. So if you have any questions about good sources, annotated bibliographies, citations, you can definitely ask them now. We have plenty of time to go over questions, but you can also go to the National History Day website. They have some great resources on like how to work with Chicago Manual of Style citations, or how to work with MLA citations and things like that. And the Michigan History Day website as well has great resources for you on these topics. So that's kind of all I've got for my presentation. If people have questions, now would be an excellent time to cover them. Or Amy, if you have things to add.
Okay, yep. You know me, I always have stuff to add. I'm not seeing any questions coming in. I do a couple things I want to talk about is that the question of, and maybe Sarah, as a former judge and someone who works in the program, you can answer this too, but there's always a question of, should a judge be able to find all of my sources in my project? Like, do I have to use all of the sources that I list in my annotated bibliography? Do they have to be on my exhibit board, or do they have to be specifically in my documentary or in, in the work I do.
I'm going to let you address that one because that has to do with History Day rules and regulations.
Right. And it's tricky. It depends, because sometimes when you're doing background information, that may not, show up on the board or in the website or anything like that. So the easy, quick answer is no, not everything has to be. But if you only use a couple of pictures in your project, but you have a ton of pictures listed as sources, judges may question, well, where are those pictures? Why didn't you use them? So it kind of depends on the source, and you just have to be careful. But that annotated bibliography, the list of the sources, should be things that you used, whether it was doing research for your project or that you used when you were building your project. And so what I tell students is you have to be able to account for all of those sources. So if a judge were to question, or I were to question you, well, how did you use this source? And you can't answer that question, then maybe that wasn't the best source to put in your annotated bibliography. Like you need to know what all of those how you used them and why they were important and what they were used for. And that's where your annotations can help when you're describing that. And I'll talk a little bit more about annotations during my session about rules and the new evaluation forms. Would you mind, because I haven't seen any other questions come in, Sarah, would you mind if you stopped your screen share so I can show a neat resource in the yearbook, oh my goodness, a neat resource in the new rule book, the contest rule book, that I'm not necessarily going to talk about with my session, but I just wanted to kind of bring up here, and I'm just trying to open up and find it. And this is a tricky thing, and you might be able to talk about it, but I know I didn't want to say this to you because it is kind of a tricky thing, but it's those sources that you find that are primary sources, like quotes, but you find them in secondary sources. Mm-hmm. And the trick of how you cite those. So here's an example that they've put in to the new year and then into the new contest rulebook. Let's see if I can zoom in. That would be really helpful if I could. Okay, so let's say in this example that they give, there's a letter in a like a textbook from Abigail Adams that she wrote, but it's in the textbook. Okay, so that textbook itself is a secondary source, but the letter, because it was written by Abigail Adams to her husband, is a primary source. So the question is, how do you cite that? And basically the answer is, if you can find that original manuscript somewhere, if you can, find where that letter is at, then you should definitely cite the primary source. But if you can't get to that and can't find it, then in the very least, you should cite it, but it should be cited as a secondary source because it's a textbook. But in your citation, you could say you use this primary source of the letter, but it came from the textbook and you had a hard time finding that original primary source. So this is in the rule book. It's on page 11. And so that's definitely something that you may want to look at if you find, because sometimes it's tricky when you find these sources as to how do you really, what's the best and correct way to cite them. Again, what I tell judges when I train judges is, as long as students can make a good argument for why they think it's that or one way or the other, that's really important, because some historians, it's hard. It just depends on, there's lots of factors. So it's hard. There's some sources that are easy and some sources that are tricky. But I just kind of I meant to share that with you, Sarah, but it totally slipped my mind.
Yeah, this is great. This is very helpful.
But I just wanted to share that with everyone, because that's a hard thing, and sometimes that judges recognize and students have a hard time, knowing how to cite that. Any other questions? Any other things? Trying to think, I took some notes if there's anything else I thought of.
Thank you for mentioning in the comments that those little citations and credits don't count against your word count.
Right, and that's important to know that because that's important when you're working on that project. But you need to be giving credit for where you're finding those things, and it should be for every single picture and quote that you use. But again, like in performances, you don't have to stop and give credit then. And the documentary, when you give the credits, a lot of people think you don't have to put citation there. You don't have to even put the website of where you found it in a documentary. You can just list videos and like YouTube, PBS, and sites where you found that, because then the judges should be able to go to your annotated bibliography and find the detailed information of what exactly those videos were and where exactly you got them. So it's two places, right? You're giving the credit and the citation on the exhibit and the website, but it should also be in the annotated bibliography. And one other thing I thought of is citation style. You can use MLA or Chicago. It's up to you. Most historians use Chicago. But whatever citation type you pick, just be consistent. And however you write those annotations and however you do your annotated bibliography, be consistent throughout. That's really the most important thing. And that makes it easier for judges to follow in case of it being everywhere, all over the place. But I can't think of anything else. Sarah, you did a great job. I loved, that Pinterest. And when I see a Pinterest in Google, gets my little heart boiling.
Yep.
Wikipedia too. Now, the tricky thing is with Wikipedia, Wikimedia, which a lot of pictures are on Wikipedia.
A lot of like common or like public domain images, which are helpful.
So sometimes you can find, those in other places, but if you can't, of course, it's appropriate to do that. But if you're citing research information like an article as Wikipedia, not the best. And hey, everyone, I use it. I go to it and find quick little pieces of information. But when you're doing a research project and you're doing good academic work, you need to do the extra steps to find where that information is and find it someplace else. And luckily, like Sarah said, it's in that bibliography they have. And a lot of times they're linked. It's not a hard thing.
A lot of times they're online sources.
Right. And
not always, but a lot of times. Yeah.
And also too with asking for, like something like the Bentley, where they may not have it digitized. A lot of places are using this COVID time to digitize things, which is a positive of what's going on. But a lot of times if you reach out as a student and say, hey, I'm an 8th grader at such and such middle school, I'm working on this project, I'm really interested in this page or this information, most people will do it for a very, very low fee or will even waive the fee and just do it for you. So don't be nervous to reach out and ask if they have it or that there's some way that you could get access to it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would just say in general, don't be afraid of using archives. They seem very intimidating and scary. And when we do this event in person, we will often go to the Archives of Michigan and walk you all through how to go to an archives to do research, just to show that it's not scary. But because we can't do that this year, I'd like to just reiterate that archives literally exist to preserve these documents and to help people use them to learn about the past. So if you reach out to them, they will be happy to hear from you and they will be happy to help you. That's literally what they're there for.
Right. Exactly. And that they love to help. So, use it. Okay. Well, anybody, any questions you want to ask Sarah or bring up, or, sources, places that you found good sources, except for the ones that we've mentioned. This is a great place to learn from each other and find out, some good places that you can go to. Or anyone want to share any ideas for how they keep track of their research while they're researching? I know we have some teachers on here. I know some teachers have access to things called Noodle Tools, which is a great program, that you can keep track of your research and teachers can access it, but not everyone has it. Some people use Google, because you can access your Google anywhere. So if you're at the library, you can bring up on your phone and, make it what the URL is and keep a record of that. Anybody want to share anything with that? No? Okay. Well, so we're a little early than our original thing. Let's see. Oh, Ms. Berger saying my students use Noodle tools and the note cards allow them to select the sources they're yeah, Noodle tools is great. Drawing the information from, lifesaver. It does. There is there can be some money associated with it. But I know some school districts, like they even use it with their language arts.
Mhm.
So, they used, Noodle Tools used to have, like the first year a teacher used it with students was free. If they were doing an NHD or MHD project. So that might be something you check out, Noodle Tools, and see if that's something that you would like. And, you know, but it is pretty cool. The little bit I've seen of it is really cool. Well, okay, so our next session isn't supposed to start till 3:30, but I think what we'll do is, if it's okay with everyone in here, let's bump that up to 3:15. I know I have some people that might be coming in just at 3:30 for that, but I am recording it. So actually we can stop recording right now.